The Universal Tech Units podcast is an official tech podcast made by Speed and Nguyen with the voice made from Google's Notebook LM. Do not reproduce our podcast without permissions from the owner. Welcome to the Universal Tech Units podcast. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into Google's ChromeOS Flex. It's an operating system with a pretty big mission, right? It promises to take that, 5-year-old Windows laptop or that aging Mac that's just collecting dust and give it a complete modern overhaul.
And our mission today, for you, to get past all the marketing talk, we're really going to unpack the reality of using Flex.
Okay.
Is it genuinely that perfect second life for old hardware? Or do the compromises, and there are compromises in stability, function, all of that, do they outweigh the benefits?
Yeah, the cost-saving and environmental stuff.
Exactly. We're going to compare it feature by feature, the standard Chrome OS, and really look at the sometimes painful reality of hardware compatibility.
Yeah. Okay, let's unpack this. Before we get to the pain points, let's start with the big picture. What exactly is ChromeOS Flex, and what motivated Google to bring it to market in the first place?
At its core, ChromeOS Flex is a version of Chrome OS, but it's meant to be installed on devices that were never, ever designed to run it.
So your typical PC and Mac.
Your typical non-Chromebooks, yes. And the motivation is sort of twofold. First, a massive reduction in e-waste, and second, giving enterprises a standardized, very secure platform for their aging fleet of machines.
And this wasn't an entirely new idea from Google. It has roots in the developer community, right?
Absolutely. Flex is basically the official successor to a project called Cloud Ready.
I remember that.
Yeah, it was a version of Chromium OS developed by a company called Neverware. Google actually acquired Neverware back in December 2020.
Okay.
Then they announced early access to what became Flex in February 2022, and it formally launched that July. So Google essentially bought a pre-existing method for giving old hardware a new cloud-focused life.
And when you look at the benefits, the case for it is pretty compelling, especially on the environmental and economic side.
Oh, hugely.
I mean, for a large organization, a school district, they might have thousands of devices that are nearing retirement. This is a huge cost saver.
Exactly. You can extend a device's lifespan by several years. That cuts down e-waste. It saves a ton on procurement costs. And critically, Google also made the installation process a lot simpler.
Simpler than Cloud Ready.
Much simpler. You just need an 8 GB USB drive to create the boot media, and you install it directly. No need for complex third-party platforms or anything like that.
And we've seen proof that this isn't just some niche project for home users. I think one of the most striking examples was Nordic Choice Hotels.
Oh, that was a big one.
Right. After they suffered a really bad ransomware attack, they switched their whole fleet, including things like kiosks and digital signs, over to ChromeOS Flex.
That is a massive endorsement. It really speaks to its security and its utility in those specialized enterprise cases.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting, because we have to talk about compromise.
The trade-off.
Right. If Flex is just Chrome OS for old devices, why would anyone, a consumer or a business, choose a dedicated Chromebook over Flex? What are the actual functional differences?
This is the absolute crux of it. The crucial distinction is all about the application ecosystem, and this is where Google drew a very, very hard line.
How so?
Their official statement is, ChromeOS Flex does not support Android apps or Google Play, period.
So no Play Store at all. You can't even sideload the apps.
That is correct. So if you're used to the versatility of a proper Chromebook, which, seamlessly runs web apps and Android apps,
Yeah, that's a big part of the appeal.
Flex feels functionally quite limited. This means you lose access to popular utility apps, like, say, advanced photo editors. Canva is a big one on Android. Or even simple mobile games.
But the core OS, the web-first experience, that's still there.
Oh, completely. Everything that runs in the Chrome browser is fully functional. It's identical to a native Chromebook. So your Gmail, YouTube, Google Docs, Netflix, Microsoft Teams, all that works perfectly.
But there are other missing features, too.
Yes. Flex also loses support for things that need tight hardware integration. So running Windows in a virtual machine is out. And for enterprise or education users, you miss out on that slick, automatic enrollment process for managing a fleet of new devices.
This limitation on Android apps, it feels less like a technical problem and more like a deliberate commercial strategy.
I think the consensus is that it's a strategic firewall.
A firewall.
Yeah. Google is heavily invested in the dedicated Chromebook market. It's affordable, it's accessible. If they let older refurbished Windows and Mac devices get full Android app support through Flex, they'd essentially be competing with themselves.
They'd be cannibalizing their own sales.
Exactly. By limiting Flex, they kind of relegate it to a secondary web-focused purpose, and that protects their main product line.
That makes a lot of sense from a business standpoint, but it definitely puts a big asterisk next to that promise of breathing new life into an old device.
It does.
So, speaking of old devices, let's talk about the hard road: installation and hardware compatibility. We know the philosophical benefits Flex is lightweight. It uses about 20 gigs of storage and maybe 1.7 gigs of RAM.
Compared to Windows 10 or 11 needing, 60 gigs of storage and 6 gigs of RAM, it's a huge difference.
A massive difference. But what are the actual hurdles to getting it up and running?
Well, there's some pretty strict prerequisites. You have to have a 64-bit Intel or AMD processor.
Which immediately cuts out any of the newer MacBooks with Apple Silicon.
Immediately. You also need a minimum of 4 gigs of RAM and at least 16 gigs of storage. And this is a big one. You need full admin access to your BIOS or UEFI settings to change the boot order.
Which can be a real pain on some older, locked-down corporate machines.
A huge pain. And Google themselves add a little warning note. They caution that processors and graphics made before 2010 might not function as expected, mostly due to driver limitations. But the philosophical problem here is that Flex is trying to be a universal donor OS for thousands of unique hardware configs.
And that approach just inevitably leads to rejection.
It's bound to.
So let's detail that rejection. What are the major real-world pain points that users run into?
The biggest initial hurdle, and it's often a complete deal breaker right at the start, is network chipset compatibility.
A Wi-Fi card.
The Wi-Fi card. Flex frequently struggles to support widely used wireless modules. The sources specifically call out problems with the Intel AX210 and the MediaTek MT7921.
And why is that specific chipset issue so devastating for this particular OS?
Because Flex requires an active internet connection to finish the setup. It has to download components, register the device. If the OS can't see your wireless card, you are completely blocked from installing it.
Unless you have a wired Ethernet port.
Right, unless you happen to have a supported Ethernet connection handy, which a lot of modern thin laptops just don't have. So you're stopped cold by a missing driver.
That is incredibly frustrating. Okay, so beyond that installation blockade, what about issues with peripherals once you actually get the OS running?
It's a complete lottery, a total hit-or-miss situation.
Like what?
Things like touch screens, touchpads, speakers, they just exhibit really inconsistent functionality. Users report that a peripheral works perfectly fine during the installation preview.
And then it just dies.
It just fails when you get to the desktop or the lock screen. And specialized inputs, like fingerprint sensors, almost always completely unsupported. Forget about it.
And what about those 2-in-1 convertible laptops? They're so common now.
That's another major area of compromise. On a 2-in-1, there is no automatic tablet mode detection.
So when you flip the screen around,
nothing happens. The system won't auto-rotate the display. It won't pop up the on-screen keyboard. You have to resort to these really complicated manual workarounds.
what does that involve?
It means digging into hidden settings menus, enabling developer flags just to get the screen to rotate manually. It completely destroys that fluid 2-in-1 experience.
Wow. Okay, so it's important to contrast all these hardware headaches with the platform's core strength, which is security.
Right. While the hardware optimization suffers, security is a huge advantage that comes directly from standard ChromeOS design.
How so?
Well, the OS's minimalism just naturally reduces the attack surface.
Sure.
And it uses powerful techniques like sandboxing to isolate every process.
And since security is a core selling point for enterprise, let's go a bit deeper on ChromeOS's cornerstone feature, verified boot. What is that exactly?
Verified boot is absolutely fundamental to the system's integrity. It ensures the device hasn't been tampered with before the OS even starts to load. And it does this using something called a hardware-based root of trust.
Okay, can you clarify that for us? What's a root of trust?
Think of it like a set of unchangeable cryptographic keys that are stored directly on the chip. It's like a digital signature that's etched in stone.
So that's the first thing it checks.
It's the very first thing the computer checks on, power up, to make sure the firmware itself hasn't been altered. Then, every single time you start the device, verified boot kicks off this two-phase validation process that checks both the firmware and the OS against that root of trust.
And the benefit of checking every single time.
This is self-healing capability. If it finds any corruption, any security issue during that check, the system doesn't just crash. It automatically triggers a recovery back to a known, good, trusted state.
Which for an IT department must be a lifesaver.
It's revolutionary. It simplifies management. It cuts downtime because compromised devices are largely self-fixing. Malware can't persist at that low level.
Okay, that robust enterprise-grade security, it stands in really jarring contrast to one debilitating operational flaw that users report.
Hmm.
The completely broken sleep system. This doesn't sound like some niche driver issue. It sounds fundamental.
It is, and it's probably the single biggest point of friction for daily use. Users report hitting sleep-related bugs constantly, maybe on over 80% of the devices they tested. And there are three major ways this bug shows up.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first and most disruptive is the failure to wake. Your laptop goes to sleep, you open the lid to turn it back on, and the screen just stays black.
Nothing.
Nothing. No display signal, no HDMI output. The only fix is a forced shutdown with the power button, which means you lose all your unsaved work.
And the second bug hits the battery life.
Correct. The failure to sleep. You close the lid, but the laptop never actually enters a low power state. The fan keeps running, the CPU is whirring away, and you come back hours later to a completely dead battery.
So it makes the device useless for portable use.
Pretty much. And the third bug really highlights the difficulty of working with older hardware.
The responsiveness issue.
Exactly. When the device does wake up, particularly on machines with old-school spinning hard disk drives,
Right.
all user input mouse clicks, typing, it's delayed for over a minute. The system is just functionally frozen, which, again, usually forces you to reboot.
But that's a hardware issue, not just a Flex issue.
It seems to be an interaction. It was noted that this specific problem went away instantly when the old HDD was swapped for an SSD. So it's not Flex itself, but it's Flex's struggle to optimize for these older, slower components that Windows or Mac OS had decades to perfect drivers for.
So we've established Flex excels at security and the browser experience, but it really falters on hardware support and, well, basic stability.
That's a fair summary.
Let's pivot to developers and business users. If you need more than just a browser, can Flex run Linux apps?
It can, but, and you can probably guess what's coming, we return to the hardware caveat.
Of course.
Flex does support the Linux development environment, which is often called crostini. However, that environment relies on the processor having robust virtualization technology, or VT.
So if your old CPU can't handle running a virtual machine, Linux is just off the table.
Precisely. A lot of older entry-level processors, like an old Pentium T4300, for example, they often lack VT support in the BIOS, or it's disabled and you can't even get to it.
So what's the alternative?
Honestly, if Linux apps are an absolute must-have on old hardware, you might be better served just bypassing Flex entirely and installing a lightweight native Linux distribution instead. You'd lose the Google Drive integration, but the apps would work.
Okay, finally, let's wrap up with the enterprise angle. Since Flex is clearly positioned for corporate fleets, how do companies manage hundreds or even thousands of these repurposed machines?
For any large-scale deployment, the optional Chrome Enterprise upgrade is basically essential. This unlocks comprehensive cloud-based management through the Google Admin Console.
And that lets you manage Flex devices and regular Chromebooks together.
Side by side in the same dashboard. It's seamless.
What kind of control does that give an IT admin?
It's incredibly deep. They get advanced security, like the ability to remotely wipe or disable a lost device, enforce strict sign-in rules. They get granular controls for networking, like forcing single sign-on or pushing out Wi-Fi config.
And they can enforce policies.
Over 300 of them. An admin can make sure a kiosk only runs one specific app, blacklisting everything else. And for IT, the promised reliability is key. Google promises a 99.9% uptime guarantee for all those cloud management services.
So after all that, what does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to weigh your options? ChromeOS Flex it's a powerful philosophy. It's secure, it's lightweight, and it's genuinely focused on reducing e-waste.
The implementation of that philosophy on such a wildly varied pool of unsupported hardware introduces significant and, honestly, painful instability.
It's a trade-off.
It's a huge trade-off. You are sacrificing the application depth you get with Android and the guaranteed stability of a purpose-built machine. In return, you get a platform that is extremely secure, web-focused, and self-healing.
So the ultimate lesson here seems to be that Flex is a viable option if your old device happens to meet those very strict requirements.
Especially on the Wi-Fi chip front.
And if you are absolutely willing to navigate those infuriating bugs, especially with something as basic as sleep, it's a great second machine for basic web tasks, maybe.
But it's very unlikely to replace your daily driver.
And that brings us to a final thought for you to mull over. We've seen that ChromeOS Flex lacks Android app support, and it seems to be largely because of Google's commercial positioning, right? To protect its Chromebook market.
Seems to be the case.
So, given how essential Android apps are to so many modern computing habits, does this limitation mean Flex is ultimately relegating all this older hardware to a purely secondary use status? Is it preventing them from truly becoming primary all-in-one machines that can handle both web and utility apps?
That's the big question.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
It was a pleasure unpacking these compromises with you.
Welcome to the Universal Tech Units podcast. See you again in the next episode of this Tech Podcast.